All right, well, welcome everyone to our lunchtime webinar. I'm going to make this a series, so we're just going to over time just go through various project management topics and kind of general software topics as well, and welcome you to join us as we do this over the weeks. If you have a topic that you'd like to recommend, send it to me, and I'd be happy to stick it on the calendar as a topic to discuss with everybody who calls in and kind of crowdsource some of the information. So this conversation is about establishing a PMO, and there's different points along the way we'll talk about. What is a PMO? We'll talk about what it can do, the benefits it can provide for your organization. We'll talk about challenges with setting up a PMO and kind of what are the basic approaches and all of that. The first question I want to open to everybody is, does anyone have a success story, like a before and after success story, where you worked somewhere where there was no PMO and the project management governance process was not very mature, and then your organization set up a PMO and you had some obvious success with it afterwards? Does anybody have a burning success story that they want to share with us about that?
I'm in the middle of that success story right now. We just started one last year, and our project managers are disparate across multiple teams, departments, even organizations, and bringing them together to standardize on things as simple as dashboards, reports, weekly updates, stakeholder management, regardless of whether you're following waterfall or a breed of agile. It's been a challenge to bring them together, but we're moving forward and happily. So I'm excited to be part of this, just to see how could we accelerate this.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you, Jacob. That's a terrific story. Anybody else have a conversion story they want to talk about converting your organization to a PMO that was successful or unsuccessful? We can learn from the unsuccessful ones too.
Back when PMOs were not in place 17 years ago, when they didn't have it, I worked for a mortgage company as director of training, and we changed over to a new system. We were coming from Calyx Point, which was not networked, to a agile, web-based, cloud-based, back in the day, software. And we didn't have a PMO in place. So I ended up taking on that responsibility, not realizing that that's what it was at that time. So basically, I trained the network department on how to network all of the applications, how to prepare all of the stations for each new mortgage broker or loan officer. I started the onboarding process and just put everything in place. But at that time, there was no real name for it, or at that time, I didn't know.
Right, yeah.
So that was a success story. We did end up opening up approximately 11 branches as a result of it.
Okay.
And the company is now defunct because of some other stuff that went on in the past. I'd probably still be with the company, but it was quite an endeavor. And now that we have structures in place and information in place, I think it might have been easier if we had a real system. But I just kind of took the bull by the horns at that moment.
Yeah, the industry has really kind of grown up too. It's nice that there's frameworks out there and a lot of process guidance on how to do this kind of stuff now, if you know where to find it. And that's been really helpful, I think, for everybody. So let's talk about what a PMO is. What's a PMO and what's an EPMO? Anybody know the difference between a PMO and an EPMO? All right, sounds like I stumped the panel. So PMO, is a project management, and I think most of us have heard of PMOs. If you're in a larger organization that has a lot of different verticals or different divisions, you'd probably have maybe a separate PMO for each division or different verticals. and then a EPMO for the whole company. And so that's how some organizations structure themselves. And the difference is that the EPMO for the whole company standardizes templates and a governance process with sign-offs and approvals and things like that. Whereas the actual PMO that's specific for that division or for that vertical really specializes on what kind of knowledge management for those areas and helping those projects succeed with the special information and attention that they need for their particular verticals or divisions. So if you hear EPMO, that's what you're hearing when somebody says we have an EPMO in our organization. Usually means they have a large organization, and that's how they've structured it. Okay, so the next question: what can a PMO do to help your organization? Well, actually, no, we're still back on what exactly is a PMO. How can a PMO help an organization that doesn't have mature process governance yet? What are some ways that PMO can help, or an EPMO?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
There's supporting PMOs are not directly accountable for project work, but exist to support project managers within other business units. Supporting PMOs will provide methodology, procedures, best practices, training, and other resources. Whereas there's I guess it's separated into three different types: supporting, directing, and a controlling PMO. EPMO is an enterprise project manager office, which I guess supersedes over all of those, each unit and whatever type of PMO they are. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So some stories I've heard in my training classes from different companies that have PMOs, different ways they support the company. One is by, as Stephanie mentioned, standardizing templates and tools and whatnot that a company uses. If you ever visit a company where they have like 10 different project management systems and they don't talk to each other, and so everybody's always duplicating information back and forth. Have you ever encountered something like that?
Absolutely. No one's on the same page.
Right. Yeah, that's one challenge that a PMO can help kind of standardize. How about the structure around a project? Like, do we have charters or not? What does a project plan look like? What does a project schedule? Do we call it a project schedule, or do we call the project schedule the project plan? A lot of companies I'll call them, guilty of that. And so what vocabulary do we use inside of our organization, and does it match the industry vocabulary? And the answer seems to come down to training. If they've been trained properly and they use the training, their vocabulary matches the industry. If that hasn't happened, usually it doesn't.
Yeah, that's where I come into play. That's why I know a little bit about the scope and the scheduling and all that, the processes, because I'm usually under the supporting PMO as the trainer, whereas where you're under the directing, it's different because they handle best practices and ensure project managers adhere to the standards, like you were saying. And then there's controlling, which hires and manages and trains a core group that can work.
Yep, that's right. So yeah, and you could think of it like this. Some PMOs are set up to sort of recommend what happens, and some PMOs are set up to mandate what happens. And that's an easy way to think about it. Just depends on the culture within the organization and who's actually setting up the PMO. And some PMOs are just a department of project managers. They call that a PMO, and that works too. And the department's free to, establish whatever criteria and standards that they want to. But it's important, though, that they do their best to match what the industry is using for vocabulary. It really helps, when they go when they do work with other companies, they both can talk the same vocabulary. They can talk about risk registers and stakeholder registers and project charters and traceability matrices and things like that. And they'll understand each other. And here's a career tip I like to give people in my classes that, experts identify each other in the industries by the use of proper vocabulary. So it's really important to learn and use the vocabulary of your industry and use it properly. Every industry has its own vocabulary. Taxes have their own vocabulary. Welding has its own vocabulary. Sports, different sports, sports leagues have their own vocabulary. Basketball has its own vocabulary, football, etc. And so one of the ways to master an industry is to learn the vocabulary as soon as you can and use it properly. All right, so what are some other ways that a PMO can help an organization?
Comparatively evaluate the progress of projects that may or may not be related to each other.
Sure. Yeah. And there are different ways that can happen. One is by standardizing the reporting system. So like we're all going to use earned value management for our, plan-based projects, and we're all going to use burn-up charts for our agile projects. And then, mandating that and helping the different project teams understand how to use those tools properly, and then offer training to the management inside the company and how to interpret those charts and that information. That's one way. Another thing that PMOs can do. I taught a class to a company in Nevada that makes space shuttle parts, and they have a PMO that goes around and audits and scrutinizes every project. They go kind of in a round robin manner. And, you could do this with your more high profile or high dollar projects. The PMO would spend some time with each project, scrutinize it. They would look at the schedule forecasts and scrutinize those. They'd scrutinize the cost models, and they'd scrutinize the risk register and the different, risk, the contingency plans for each of the risks that were identified. And they just kind of be like a second opinion, third opinion. They look over all these and kind of challenge their project managers a little bit on what they had planned to do. And then they'd go off to the next project, and 2.5 months, 3 months later, they're back again to scrutinize their project again. And after it had gotten, down the road a little bit, and they found this was really helpful. And, it was a little bit uncomfortable, but everybody understood the purpose of it. It was to help the projects end up more accurately, and also reduce the risk involved in the project along the way. So that risk reduction factor was really helpful. All right. What are some other ways that PMO can help your organization? Anybody here work for a regulated in a regulated industry, FDA regulated or SEC regulated?
Yes, I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and they were regulated. So we had compliance that we had to work around, the training, regulatory rules.
Yeah, medical. So did you have a HIPAA compliance or just general FDA compliance you had to deal with?
Both. I had both to deal with.
Yeah. And so instead of everybody having to become an expert in the company on all these different compliances, a PMO could establish a kind of a center of excellence for compliance, and then they could offer any education that any of the project managers need on compliance in those areas. And they could also, scrutinize projects for compliance, and they could insert wherever they needed to into the project governance process, any kind of compliance, quality checks that are needed or wherever they are needed.
Absolutely. And when we were building curriculum, they needed to be evaluated and determine whether or not they fit the government standards based on their information before we relay them and facilitate the information to the organization. We don't want to have a down trickle effect of information that was incorrect. So yeah, the PMO ensured that it fit regulatory compliances and best practices, anything that would, you know, we're teaching a whole company.
Another way a PMO could be helpful to an organization is by providing process guidance for the portfolio management committee on how to prioritize projects. You know, companies grow two ways. They grow through sales, of course, but they also grow through projects. Anytime a company innovates or develops something in addition to whatever they offer, that's a project. And so there's lots of projects going on all the time. And when companies are kind of startups, they often don't understand portfolio management. I remember when I worked for a medical software company, some days were like this, and you guys that have been to my classes, you've heard the story before, but you know, I'd show up there on a Monday as the development manager, and waiting for me would be the VP of marketing, and he would say, you know, we promised a bunch of doctors that we'd have this feature in the product at this upcoming trade show in 3 weeks. And, you know, if we don't have the feature in the product, there's no point in us even going to the trade show. You know, we're going to look bad. And we've already spent $75,000 on booth fees, so we can't back out now. So that was a pretty persuasive argument right there for his request. And then an hour later, I'd have the VP of sales come into my office, and he'd be wringing his hands, and he'd say, we just lost a big sale because we don't have feature Y in the product. You know, we've got some other big sales on the radar, and we can't afford to lose them over this reason. You know, somebody must have written a journal article recently because all the doctors are asking about this in the sales calls, and we got to get this feature in the product by the next release. Okay, that sounds pretty important. We'll do that. And then about an hour later, I'd have the director of help desk come in my office, and he would say, you know, we've got half the help desk team strung out over these two bugs that we know have been in the product for the last couple of releases. Please, can we get those, you know, fixed as soon as possible? And say, yeah, that's pretty urgent. Okay, we'll get that done. And then the president of the company would come in my office, and he would say, I went golfing with Jack over the weekend and promised him we'd put feature Z in the product. Can you make sure that happens? Yeah, President, whatever you ask for. So, you know, there's a problem emerging. And the problem was that there was me, the little dev manager, steering the company. You know, who knows what actually went into the next release, but I can tell you it wasn't all of those things. And we do our best to get as many of them in, but we just really couldn't. And I knew something was really wrong, but I didn't know what the answer was. And I remember even we interviewed a COO, and I explained the problem to him and asked him how he would solve that problem. And he said, well, who's the dev manager? I said, oh, that's me. And he said, well, isn't that your problem to solve? I thought that was a really gutsy thing to say in it. But anyway, I came to learn later that, you know, the solution to that is portfolio management, where all the senior executives, all the same people talking to me, they should have been meeting like every other week and discussing these needs and prioritizing them, and then coming up with a go forward list, and then inviting me in the last 15 minutes of the meeting to discuss when the different teams were going to be available to start the next objectives. And that we call that portfolio management. And that's great. But after a company figures that out, and by the way, only about 50% of the companies out there understand what I just said and have anything like that in place. So once a company has that in place, another dysfunction starts to emerge. And the second dysfunction is that whoever screams the loudest or you know, whines the loudest or whatever, you know, gets their projects funded at the expense of everybody else. And so or even worse, the owner of the company always gets their projects funded and nobody else does. And although that's great for the owner, that's not really in the best interest of the organization. So even worse, the owner's kids, who have usually unjustified positions within the company, get their projects funded. And So after a while, everybody gets frustrated in the portfolio management committee, and they want some more equitable way to decide which projects should get funded. And so one of the roles of the PMO can be to provide process guidance to the portfolio management team on how to do that. And so, you know, PMI offers like 4 different ways to do that, and there's some strategies around that. But that's something else that a PMO could do for a company, is provide guidance on how to prioritize projects for the best interest of the company. All right. Any other ways that a PMO can help an organization? Some other I've got a list here I'm looking at. Improved resource allocation. So a PMO can help the different project teams share lessons learned with each other, and understand how you know, risk management can be used better within an organization to preserve resources, and et cetera, and all of that. Something else a PMO can do is they can work with the management within a company to train them on how to use a project team better. We all know that when your stakeholders that give you requirements, when they don't do a really good job up front, does anybody have that experience where they give you really shallow requirements, and so your team gets busy, and then the stakeholder shows up in a little while and they're like, no, that's not what I want, I really wanted this, and they change their mind, and then all of a sudden there's this big scramble. And you know, we have the iceberg principle, where they're changing just the top, what you see above the water, but the team has to do everything under the water also, and it's a really disruptive. So they can provide training for the non-project team managers to use the project teams better to expedite the projects. Let's see, what else can you guys think of that would a PMO can do for a company?
Maybe determining what IT department is responsible for as opposed to other departments. So for instance, I'll give you an example. I work in digital transformation. So with that, I train software applications, but my background is in computer science. My degree is in computer science and information technology. So sometimes I take it upon myself to fix problems so that I can go ahead with the training and it doesn't delay the schedule. And a PMO will tell you, look, you didn't get hired for that.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, maybe ensuring that you stay on task with what you should be doing, as opposed to what another department should be handling.
Yeah.
So schedule.
Yeah, it's a very insightful comment. Yeah, thanks, Kristen. In fact, you kind of touched on a broader topic of, you know, another thing a PMO can do is kind of assess the engagement, the health of the engagement between the team and the stakeholders, and make sure that there's evidence of healthy interactions and regular interactions going on. You know, the number one reason for project failure is a lack of customer involvement. And so teams will get busy and make all this stuff without involving the customers. And then, you know, a year later or something, this is how we used to do software in the old days before Agile. A year later, we present this piece of software that we built in some cave somewhere to the end users who gave us the requirements a year ago. And, you know, it was common for it to be not a good fit. And, you know, that's how we used to develop software. And today we have Agile approaches that help us keep that customer involvement all the way through. And so a PMO can assess how well that's going, and if that looks healthy or not. That's something that a PMO can do. And all of these things help a organization execute better, is really what they do. One other thing that a PMO can do is help with a company's ability to estimate and provide better and tighter estimates through learning from the past. Every organization is unique and has their own environment that they work within. And if a company creates a estimation procedure and tunes it and tunes it and tunes it over time, it'll get better and better and much more valuable and accurate than any other kind of industry technique that's out there for estimating. And so that's something that a PMO can create and support and marshal among all the different groups and get better and better, the tighter and tighter standard operating procedure on how to estimate. So those are some ways that a PMO can help your organization improve. And see, anybody else have any other comments about this before we move on to the next question? Okay. The next topic then is, what are some challenges that you might face when creating a PMO, and how could we get past some of those challenges?
Inertia. There's going to be disparate inertia across how the portfolios have been running, how the projects have been running. Whatever practices they've found that have worked for them may not be able to scale or may not be able to be adaptable.
Yeah, resistance to change. That really is a human thing. What are some ways to deal with and succeed against inertia and resistance to change? Hi, Lee. Welcome. Guys, we have Agile Dad here.
How's it going?
Awesome.
Sorry, I'm late, but I just thought I'd pop in. So hopefully I'm not disruptive. Go ahead and do your thing.
Well, I was going to say something. When you're training, you deal with a lot of pushback. People that aren't willing to change. So you have to use your change management skills. With that saying, maybe cajoling them, maybe comparing what they used to do as opposed to what they do now, maybe evaluating their work environment to determine if their job that they're doing is what they are, whatever their responsibility is or role is. You determine if it fits within their role, or is there someone else in the department. So you would do maybe a time and motion studies and process studies just to see what everybody is doing collectively in that department. And if we're building that software to fit what their roles are and giving them the credentials and hierarchy that they need to see what they're supposed to do on their dashboard, so to speak. Also, with pushback.
Yeah, change management. It took me a while to understand that change management is code for getting people to do things they don't want to do. And once you understand that, you realize why there's so much content written about change management, because that's really what we're doing. And there's a great model out there called the ADKAR change model. And if you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. It's a simple, I think it's just a 5-step process. And it's pretty good structure on helping people get through change, and particularly in the business world. But it talks about how you should first of all make sure everybody understands the benefit of the change and why this is happening, and make sure they have a clear vision of what they actually need to do to make the change. And then once the change is made, it's important to give them a lot of encouragement and a lot of positive feedback about, they've made the change, and now the organization needs to support them so that the change can be successful. And some people need particularly special attention right after the change is made to make sure that everything is successful. And so those are some ways that we can help with the actual change process when converting from I'll call it a disorganization into an organization that has a PMO that's working properly. All right, another problem that we can face when dealing with setting up a PMO is a lack of resources. So, if everybody decides to create a PMO and then nobody really knows what to do next, or they don't have the time to put into it, you could have a kind of a half-baked attempt that doesn't really go anywhere. And then it becomes a bad memory for everybody involved. And so nobody wants to try it for a while. And that's a problem. Who else can think of challenges that are faced with creating a PMO inside of an organization? Back to change management again, something else that I remember learning. If you're not aware of this, anytime you make a platform change inside of a larger organization, something you should be aware of and prepared for is that if you have a lot of older employees, people will use that as a trigger to retire. And that often broadsides companies. Are not quite ready for that. So they'll roll out a new system and all of a sudden, 15% of their staff leaves, and they weren't ready for that. So that's something that you need to be aware of if you're going to be changing big things within a company with a lot of employees. That could be disruptive.
That is so valid. It really is valid.
Yeah, that's all right. Probably another problem that would be
challenges. Sorry, I'm sorry. You were saying challenges.
Yep.
Like lack of alignment could be a challenge. Lack of benefits, realization, like them understanding that there's a benefit, that they don't trust the metrics of what's going on. Maybe they have a lot of useless information. Those can be challenges, like old information, so it can cause a problem.
Yeah, Stephanie, do you have a story behind that? Sounds like there might be a story behind that comment.
Yeah, there's tons of stories. When you work in training software, like I said, it rears its ugly head. There could be problems around. There might be a supervisor that decides that she does not want to change at all. She doesn't want to learn. And then her whole team follows her because they are loyal.
Yeah.
And then she has documented information that she thinks is valid information, but now we're revamping the whole program. And now we've done research and found that there's updates, like for instance, HIPAA compliance, things of that nature. And she wants to stay with how she learned it initially. Also, there's just people that don't want to do anything extra. They say, basically, I've learned it. I'm doing it this way. I go click, 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 click here. And now we're telling her to go click, 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 click. And she's 2 more clicks and she doesn't want to do that click. And it could be something very simple. And she's just, there's people that push back that really just are not happy with change.
That's such a funny thing. I remember in the medical software industry, we'd have doctors that would complain that something was 3 clicks away. And, I get it. We really should have made it 2 clicks away or 1 click away or put it on a toolbar. But privately, we would joke that's longer than what? Writing it all down on paper and pen, like that's really time consuming. And so we would kind of joke.
I had one manager that I was training site, and I'm not going to go into it, but he basically said that she's complaining about clicking, and I used to have to carry rocks and sort them at one point. Heavy bags of rocks. So when you think about it in comparison, this is so easy in comparison to those type of jobs that you have to do actual labor.
Yeah, that is true. All right. So want to make you aware of a few resources if you are creating a PMO. So one of them is PMI has a practice guide called Implementing Organizational Project Management. and it's gonna be useful to you. It's a thin book. It's not very, very thick. And there's some good tips in here. You know, they talk about being sure you understand the vision and mission of the organization and the current strategy. And, you know, that should be a constant thread through all of the projects that get approved, and that, you know, that they all tie back to the strategy of the company. You want to make sure that that's kind of a theme all through your PMO and all your project managers, that they understand that. And that's usually governed by the sponsor. But that's a good question. If somebody, you know, approaches them with a project and it like has nothing to do with the corporate strategy, you know, that's a good question for them to say, how does this fit with the corporate strategy? And just kind of let the sponsor think about that a little bit. The project manager should always be the first hurdle of corporate strategy and common sense. And so sometimes you get the sponsor to think a little bit about, yeah, maybe we should tweak this a little bit so it fits more our corporate strategy a little bit more. And let's see, that's about it. So I just want to give you a little bit of an update of the PMI community in general. If you guys don't know, they discontinued the PMBOK 6, so be prepared for that. PMBOK 7 is out. It's been out for about 6 months, and it's a thin book that is all about how to be a great project manager. It's all about good soft skills. I have friends that are not in the project management industry, and I tell them to buy PMBOK 7 and read it because it's an excellent guide to soft skills. And what they've done is the PMBOK 6 they've discontinued, and they kind of kept us hanging for about 6 months. And they just came out with this publication. This is brand new. This is about 2 weeks old. They started printing this. It's called Process Groups, a Practice Guide. And what it is they took the PMBOK 6 and they shortened it into just the part that you really need to know about. And so here are the 49 different processes. They don't call it the PMBOK 6. It's just practice groups. So this now goes hand in hand with PMBOK 7, and this is now the study material for PMBOK 7. So you should be aware of that if you're not already. You know, we have a little bit of time. I suppose we should talk about agile projects in a PMO. Does anybody here have any experience integrating teams with that are doing existing plan-based project management and then bringing in agile?
I'm sorry, Michael, I missed that question.
Oh, yeah, Stephanie, I was just saying, has anyone had any experience starting agile projects within an existing organization that's used to doing traditional plan-based projects? And anybody have reference they could talk about that
Yeah. Yeah, we used to be on plan-based projects, and we were releasing new product software about every 8 weeks at best. And then I came in, and we had talked a lot about doing Scrum as an initial approach, and we went from releasing every 8 weeks to about 3 times per week, getting closer to a CI/CD model. And it was amazing how many people stopped complaining.
Yeah, that's very good. Can you tell us what CI/CD means for anybody who may not know that term?
Yeah, continuous improvement and continuous delivery. So we started off by like batching our releases, right? We would get, 2 months worth of work backed up, bottled up, and then we'd release it to the into production, and all hell would break loose. The one particular release that I came on to observe, day 2 for me, was watching this happen, was a release that we'd been working on for 18 months. And so when it went out, like just the ground shook. Things fell apart left and right. And I saw that. I was like, I don't like that drama. That's no fun for anyone. What do we got to do to de-dramatize this whole event? And so now we get down to single bug releases, single task releases, with automation around the QA, automation around the release process, automation around the metrics, and it was so simple and so drama free. Everyone slept better.
Yeah, that's a great success story. That's good. Did you guys get training? Did you get agile training?
I'm a certified Scrum product owner. I've been running Scrum for a while. I had just come from a different department, same overall organization, but just a different department, and where we had introduced Scrum practices there. And that one was a little bit more different because we had 2-3 developers, 2-3 project managers, and about 80 projects to run within at a time. And so, you almost treated a project like a task in that department. But that was a wholly different world. But short answer to your question was no, we didn't receive any dedicated project training or agile training other than go read the Phoenix Project.
Yeah, which is a good book, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. So companies, it sounds like Jacob, you got training, which is excellent. It's really helpful for organizations to get trained, particularly with Scrum. You can read a book and do parts of it, and it kind of fails and falls down, and you won't understand why. That was my introduction to Scrum way back in 2006, 2007. I read half of a couple of books and tried it, and it wasn't quite working right, and I didn't know why. I knew that people were talking about how exciting and good it was, but I didn't know what the magic was. So I went and got trained and changed everything. I was able to implement it very well, and it worked very smooth after that anywhere I ever went. So if you haven't got trained, just like, PMP training for traditional project management is essential. You need to get Scrum Master, product owner trained for Agile. All right. So something else I want to bring to your attention. Let's see. So I've got a framework I've created that's out there called the Stable Framework. And I don't know if you guys have heard of this yet. Some of you have. See, Agile Dad's, he's got his Stable book, and we're going through Stable. So Stable is a quality management framework that is designed for IT. It's based on the same thing Scrum is based on. Scrum was based on the Toyota quality system. A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of the foundations of Scrum really came from there. The stand-up circle, the information radiator, different the teams, cross-functional teams. That whole concept came from the Toyota production system. And so a lot of great stuff came out of there. And there's even more there that if you look deeper, there's a lot of other things that they do that are really useful. And so I spent about 10 years studying the Toyota production system, and went and visited a Toyota factory and everything. And anyway, so the Stable Framework is a framework for solving the hidden factory problem in IT. What the hidden factory problem is everything your group does over again because it didn't go right the first time. So that means all the firefighting, anytime they give you requirements that were bad, you got to go back and redo it. Anytime you build something and then it gets thrown away, or worse, you do a whole project and it gets discarded. Anytime you have anything like that, we call that the hidden factory. And people often call it technical debt, but they're really two different things. Technical debt is anytime your programmers take an engineering shortcut to get something out the door, they may or may not have to go back and pay back that technical debt. But hidden factory problems, they always have to go back and fix. They're mistakes, and so they have to go back and fix them. And we call that rework or scrap, and every company everywhere deals with that. So the hidden factory is a set of practices that are compatible with Scrum. They can fit right on top of a Scrum implementation, or like in Stephanie's situation, they can work inside of an implementation team or an ops team or DevOps group or whatever. And it's a set of practices for identifying what we call them value propositions are, what the final deliverable points are inside your organization. And you look at the value stream that leads up to those value propositions. For each one of those value propositions, they each have their own value stream, and you organize them into standard repeatable processes, right? And think of those repeatable processes as standard work. And just like when you go to a hospital, you've heard this term standard of care. So what we do is we organize these standard work processes into what we call katas. And a kata is something you do over and over again, trying to get better at it. And we have some tools we use to do that called a kata card. That's one of the tools. We also have recovery models and you know, a central location in a process asset library where all this information gets stored, where we are able to create institutional knowledge of how to do all these processes better and better each time. And so so companies that adopt stable, their hidden factory shrinks. And if you think about what percentage of your time is your team's time is devoted to firefighting and dealing with all the chaos and confusion, and if you could imagine a future where that is as close to zero as possible, that's what Stable Framework will do for you. And so you get this book on Amazon. It's $25. And if you see me around at a conference, I may be able to hand you one. But anyway, there are certifications out now for it. There's we've learned from Scrum, you know, Scrum grew through certifications. XP didn't, and XP didn't have certifications, and it's not here now. It wasn't kept consistent and pure, and so it kind of disappeared. And so the industry's taught us that these things need to be presented as certifications. That seems to work best. So anyway, I just want to make you aware of that. And thank you for your time. I think we're about done. Anybody have any final comments or questions about creating a PMO? All right. Yeah, Lee.
I want to give you a shameless plug too. So I'll tell you what, I've known Mike for years, and I know many of you do as well. But whether you're setting up a PMO, whether you're trying to understand Stable Framework, whether you're trying to just really get your head around how to make your project management life better, I think a big part of this has to do with culture. And a lot of people in the industry are afraid to breach culture. They're afraid to talk about instrumental changes inside of organizations that afford opportunities for growth. And what I've discovered is that I've taken plenty and plenty of courses. In fact, I am a certified Stable process owner as well as a master chief. And what I can tell you is Stable kind of brings everything together. And I know this is about PMOs, but when you make a PMO, when you're creating a PMO, one of the things you have to consider is not only the culture of the organization, but the culture of how projects are going to be handled. And I really do feel like Stable covers a lot of those bases where other avenues fall short. And it's not so much that they couldn't do it if they tried. It's just no one's taken the time to codify and pull it all together until Mike did. So one of the things that I've discovered, and tying back to the question now, when you're trying to stand up a PMO, there's really three things you need to have. The first thing you need to have is buy-in. You need to make sure that everyone understands why you're standing it up, what the purpose is, what you're trying to do, and how you're going to steer it, what direction it's going to go. It has to have some kind of North Star, some kind of higher level vision. The second thing you need some type of framework or some type of guiding foundation that you're going to stand this up on. So that way, not only do you have the reason why behind the what, but now you have the foundation that you can build all these principles on. And that's basically the only way you're going to be successful setting up any PMO. And then the third is you have to gain the confidence and the trust of the people who are working on these projects so that they can help you organize. Because the truth is, no one person can stand this up perfectly just on their own. And that's why it's important for you to surround yourself with the right people and the right tools so that you can have the ability to do it. And what I can tell you is I've been in this industry for as long as Mike has, I can tell you that now. And I couldn't be more proud to represent Stable and say, you know what, it really is a big thing. And it does help with standing up PMOs because it helps you identify and see things that you might be overlooking. So just like you would have certain checklists and formulas that you use in your traditional PMP project management, it's important for you to consider some of the newer updated things that you can use in your toolkit to help you stand up your PMO. So that's all.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate your comments. Okay, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time. There are some blog entries for creating a PMO on blog.redrockresearch.com that if you haven't seen, you can go check out there. You'll find them. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time, and we'll see you again. I'm going to be doing this about every couple weeks, so we'll pick different topics and have kind of a lunchtime chat, and hope to see you there in the future.